Yakitori, Voice of the Web. Demon Beasts by Takahashi Genichiro. Translated from the Japanese by Ryan Shalgi and Morrison. Tanaka was out, but he had no place to go. His only belonging was a small duffel bag. That day he thought he'd sleep in the underpass. But the spot was already taken. Men were living in cardboard boxes stocked with water bottles. When Tanaka wrapped himself in newspapers and tried to sleep, one of the men protested. "Hey, you can't sleep there." "What? Wrapped in newspapers? What era are you from, man?" Tanaka continued to the park. Here were not cardboard boxes, but blue tarpaulin huts. A line of such huts stretched along the fence from the park entrance to as far as the eye could see. Each hut was sealed at the entrance. The insides of several were visible. Umbrellas were propped up at each entrance. Plastic bottles and liquor bottles were strewn about, and something appetizing was brewing in a pot atop a portable gas stove. Some huts even had TVs. What did they do for electricity? Most of the men were reading newspapers. When they realized that Tanaka was peeping in on them, they hid the lower halves of their faces with their newspapers and shouted, "Get out of here! Who you looking at? What are you, some kind of hobo?" Tanaka didn't know what to make of these people. He cut across the park. An elderly man was lying on a bench. A cold drizzle began to fall over him. Tanaka stared at the old man for a while. The man didn't move. Tanaka couldn't tell whether he was asleep or dead. Tanaka spent the night in the public toilet. The next day Tanaka went out to look for work. He picked up a newspaper and made a few calls. But there were no leads. Even for ordinary people, there was no work. The situation was all the more grim for Tanaka, who was saddled with disadvantages. "I'll do anything. I'll even lick dirty ass." Tanaka opened the door. So this must be what they call a swanky office. Classical music flowed softly from a thin speaker boarded to the wall. There was a sofa the color of snow. On a white table were several purple, green, blue, and orange computers. Between the computers were an ornamental plant and an oddly shaped lamp. In an aquarium, wildly bright tropical fish were bobbing up and down. Everything had an artificial feel to it. "I've got no chance in hell. This will be no different than all those other times." Turned away at door. Hung up after the first few words. Occasionally I'd make it past the phone call stage, only to be rejected as soon as I set foot in the office. Once, by some miracle, Tanaka landed an interview. But the moment he diffidently began to describe his background, the meeting came to an abrupt halt. "I don't know about other companies, but you're definitely not working for us." The man standing before Tanaka was still young. His hair was blonde, yet he appeared to be Japanese. By now, Tanaka was growing accustomed to such things. Yet he also felt annoyed. Annoyed that there were Japanese with blonde hair and blue eyes, due to contact lenses. Annoyed that there were Japanese with blackened faces. Annoyed that there were non-Yakuza Japanese who were covered in tattoos, and so forth. "Come back tomorrow." "You can start then," the man said, scanning his date book. "To be honest, I just got out of prison." "Yes, that's right. You might say I'm a bit out of touch with today's world. I'm not so young either. And also, we could care less about all that." Tanaka could see into the man's mouth as he spoke. Ordinarily, this wouldn't be an issue. People speak, their mouths open, the insides are visible. Simple as that. Man has gotten by like this for 5 million years. No one ever paid any attention to it. In the man's throat was a tongue. The tongue was split down the middle. The two split tongues were moving slightly out of sync. What's with his tongue? It's split in half. Must be the devil himself. Tanaka nearly let out a shriek. But all that emanated from his throat was mute. Tanaka tried to flee, but unable to stand, he remained glued to the chair. "Surprised," the man said, flashing a smile. "Everyone is surprised at first, but they soon get used to it. With his jaw dropped, Tanaka stood there gawking at it. He tried to look away, but it was no use. It was as if the split tongue was exerting some irresistible gravitational pull. Is this some kind of magic trick? Tanaka managed to spit out. It's called tongue splitting. I had it done by an oral surgeon in the US. It was a simple operation, really. The incision and suture together take no more than 15 minutes. You can get it done in the States for under $1,000, but in Japan it's still uncommon, so the cost is quite high. Insurance won't cover it, and a lot of people do it themselves. If that's the case, you just make several pierces down the middle of the tongue, and tie them all up with a fishing line. Then, after a few weeks, the tongue splits in a clean line right down the middle. Tanaka's gaze was transfixed to the man's cleft tongue as he spoke. This guy's not shitting me. His tongue is actually split in two, and the two tongues are moving. Just then a young woman came into the room. She had on an extremely short skirt that looked more like underwear. Look at the body on that gal. Her breasts and ass seem about to burst when she struts around in that dress. What must a girl eat to get breasts like that? The woman's hair was green, her eyes were golden, and each of her fingernails was roughly 2 inches long and inscribed with an intricate pattern. Let me introduce you. This is Mary Ann, our secretary. Mary Ann, meet Mr. Tanaka. He'll be joining us from now on. Hi there. I'm Mary Ann. Pleased to make your acquaintance, she said as she turned toward Tanaka. Mary Ann, yet Japanese. This much I can handle. Tanaka peered into her mouth. Her tongue was not split. It had a normal shape. Tanaka felt relieved. Thank God. For a moment there I thought. But his relief was premature. Tanaka noticed the odd location of her tongue. The woman extended her tongue. The tongue unfolded and extended and kept unfolding and extending until it reached the bottom of her chin, which it licked, as if to commemorate its arrival. Tanaka let out another groan. He was now drenched in a cold sweat. His head was swimming, and he felt ready to vomit. He had felt like this once before, after being thrown into solitary confinement for a week. Mary Ann has had what is called a tongue lengthening. Basically, it involves an incision to the connective tissue behind the tongue using a surgical knife. A surgeon performed it on her, but it's simple enough to do on your own. You just put some xylocaine inside your mouth and wait for the tongue to go numb. Then, lifting the tongue with your hand, you snip the frenulum with small surgical scissors. There's no bleeding, since the frenulum is the only part of your mouth that doesn't have blood vessels running through it. Some say the procedure may cause you to swallow your tongue and choke to death, but this is a groundless rumor, a so-called urban legend. You see, Mr. Tanaka, what we're trying to launch at our site is something called somatic ornamentation, also known as body modification. The simplest form of this is tattooing, but what we're trying to do is far more radical and complex. You just saw 2 real-life examples of a tongue splitting and a tongue lengthening. Now let me show you another type of body modification involving the tongue. Saying this, the man started up the computer in front of Tanaka. The screen came on. He punched something inches. This here is something called a tongue removal. A video began to play in the center of the screen. Someone turned to Tanaka and smiled. Tanaka gazed into its mouth. His mouth is empty. What happened to his tongue? Unfortunately, you can't count on your surgeon for this one. The more conscientious the surgeon is, the more reluctant he is to perform it. Nor can you do it by yourself. You need a friend or someone to help out. The method is pretty clear-cut. First, you tightly pinch the root of the tongue with an iron clamp, and leave it there until your nerves go dead, and you no longer feel anything. Once you've gotten this far, you're pretty much done. You just need to cut the spot where the upper and lower incisors meet. But you've got to be very careful about bleeding and swelling. And if you cut the wrong spot, the leftover tongue may get lodged in the throat. This is definitely not something to be done for cosmetic purposes alone. We always advise those considering the operation to consult with a psychiatrist first. This step is absolutely critical. After all, the severed tongue is never coming back. But why? Tanaka's voice quivered as he attempted to shrink his mouth to the smallest size possible. He was afraid that if he showed his tongue, the guy might split it in half. Why would anyone do this? That's a good question, the man responded genially. We believe everyone wishes to transform themselves into something better. This is why women apply makeup, why men blacken their bodies in tanning salons, and so forth. And when these standard methods are no longer sufficient, the next phase is liposuction, breast augmentation, cosmetic surgery, and also tattooing and piercing. Yet for some people, even these methods are not enough. Which is where we come in. To provide further procedures and information. Plastic surgery and tattooing were once underground phenomena, but today we think nothing of them. What we are trying to do too will someday be regarded as standard forms of body modification, although at the moment these forms are still heterodoxy. You'd be surprised how many people are looking for a community to indulge their tastes. Which is why they cut off their tongues. You seem to be missing the point. Tongue splitting and tongue lengthening are actually among the lighter forms of body modification. That is, their purpose is simply to enhance sexual pleasure. Once you've had sex with a reconstructed tongue, you'll never want to go back to the old way of doing it. It will just seem trite. For one thing, tongue splitting allows you to reach different spots at once, while tongue lengthening lets you reach places that you couldn't get to in the past. Say, Mr. Tanaka, why don't allow Mary Ann to give you a blowjob just this once? I can assure you, if there's a heaven on earth, this is the closest you'll ever get to it. Tongue removal, on the other hand, is another affair altogether. Most tongue removers have it done to express certain political or religious convictions. But such matters agree to me, really. That reminds me, there's something else I must show you. Tanaka was silent. He didn't want to see something else. He didn't want to see anything. Tanaka did not come back into the world to witness such things. He simply wanted to work. He was even willing to lick dirty ass. The last thing he wanted to see was a split tongue. Ken, come here for a sec, the man called to someone as he pushed a button on the table. The back door opened, and in came a large man with a grin on his face. The man gave the impression of a lump of mindless mass. He had piercings dangling, not only from his ears, lips, and nose, but from his entire face. Ken, show Mr. Tanaka what you've got. Still grinning, Ken pulled down his pants. Tanaka screamed, or rather tried to scream. Yet no sound emerged. Tanaka just sat there pitifully, his lips trembling. What happened to his prick? His prick is split into, oh, Mama, what's wrong with these people? What happened to the world while I was in the pen? Ken has undergone something called genital splitting. Think of it as a kind of enhanced urethrotomy. An incision is made in the penis from the base to the top, causing a clean split. They say it's quite painful. The bleeding is heavy. Did you know the nerves of the penis are concentrated in the upper half, which is probably why it hurts so much? The surgery has also been known to cause erectile dysfunction, which means there is a risk. But if it goes well, you will have in your hand 2 fully functioning penises. So, Tanaka, what do you make of all this? Are you wrapping your head around the awesomeness of it all? The man and Ken exchanged knowing glances and smiled. But Tanaka did not notice. By this point, Tanaka was barely listening. Oh, Mama, these people are insane. Absolutely fucking insane. One of our most popular items today is the penile subincision. Basically, it's an incision to the underside of the penis. There are 2 types of it, and the short subincision, where you cut only the bottom part of the glans penis, is a perennial favorite. Think of it as a kind of congenital hypospadias. In most cases, the patient performs it on himself. You just clamp the incision area with a hemostat. But you've got to clamp it slowly. There's no pain at all if you use EMLA or some other local anesthetic. And you don't need to be a doctor to get EMLA. The drug is even a popular item at sex shops in the US, but it's harder to get in Japan, which is why we're trying to import it privately through our site. Anyway, once you've removed the hemostat, the incision area should now be paper thin. It's a simple procedure, and it feels much better than inserting a silicone ball or something into. At any rate, Mr. Tanaka, that's the long and short of it. This may all come as a bit of a shock at first, but I want you to understand exactly what it is we are trying to import to Japan. Namely, body modification, or better yet, body reconstruction, the altering of your body according to a preferred image. Customers contact us through our site, we provide the information, and eventually they provide us with new info and images, and then we publish it. We receive the payment, which is set at a fixed rate. This is already a booming industry in the US. People into this stuff have few places to go. Our site is at once a hospital, a temple, and a convenience store all wrapped in one. There are just some legal issues to clear first. After all, we are walking a fine line between legality and illegality. I've also heard rumors that the Yakuza are plotting to penetrate the industry, and that the location of our site is being tracked. This line of business is no cakewalk, nor is it entirely safe. But it is, after all, a growing industry. You getting all this, Mr. Tanaka? I'm sorry, may I use the restroom? This was all Tanaka could muster to say. He hobbled to his feet. He felt light in the head. His nausea persisted. He entered the restroom and urinated. He looked at his penis. It was not yet split. Computers were installed even here in the restroom. The screen was explaining some kind of site. A video was playing too. Click here for information regarding leg removal. Leg removal is a form of limb amputation. Please proceed to the next window. You may now retrieve our video footage of a leg removal. A man lay on an operating table. His face was covered with a cloth. One of his legs was missing. A chunk of flesh from his remaining thigh had been lopped off, and white bone lay exposed. A surgeon began to cut into the bone with something like a saw until eventually the entire leg dropped to the floor with a thud. Tanaka left the restroom and returned to the office. Ken was lying down naked on the desk. His penis was furiously erect. Marian took turns licking with her long tongue the two penises that crossed at a 15-degree angle. Her tongue looked like a snake curled in the branches of a tree. The man with the digital camera turned to Tanaka and, winking, said, "Here, take over the filming for a bit. I'm going to join inches, just hold it steady like this." Tanaka walked toward the desk. He took out a knife from his duffel bag. Then, in a single swift motion, he slid the knife along the man's jaw. Blood gushed from his jaw as water from a ruptured pipe. His throat had been split open right down the side. The man appeared unable to comprehend what was happening. He looked as if he was about to say, "Come on now, enough with the jokes." Yet he did look bewildered. Then, just like that, the man toppled over. At such times the thought processes of a man cease altogether. Ken and Mary and dumbly stared at Tanaka as he approached them, smiling, knife in hand. Tanaka grabbed hold of Ken's penis, both penises. Then, with great ease, he lopped them off. What he? WWWHHH at. Foaming at the mouth, Ken began to weep. Tanaka now turned toward Marianne, who stood there petrified. Jamming his fingers into her mouth, Tanaka gave her tongue a brisk tug, and slid the knife sideways across it. "Oh, Mama, these people are demon beasts. No sane person could ever do the things they do. What would happen to the world if such demon beasts were allowed to roam? Don't you see, Mama? These weirdos are trying to turn the world on its head. It's like what my doctor said, you know, the shrink in charge of me in prison. You're not a bad man, he said. You're not an animal. Something just came over you. That's what he told me, Mama. You're not evil. A thin veil had been placed over your eyes at that moment. You had no choice in the matter. And he was right, Mama. I'm sure of it. How else could I have slit the throats of my own 2 parents? That wasn't me who did it. That wasn't my deed. It was the deed of some demon beast I don't even know. I'm sure of it, Mama. Which is why I must see to it that such demon beasts never again roam the earth. You'll understand me, won't you, Mama? Tanaka took hold of the still wailing Ken's hair, and, placing the knife behind his jaw, drew it slowly. The blade cut through the muscles and tendons, and he could feel it arrive at the bone. Putting his weight into it, Tanaka continued to saw back and forth. He felt it cut through the bone. Then, he let go of the hair. The head fell to the floor. Now just one more to go. Tanaka turned toward Marianne. Her face wore an uncanny expression. This was not the expression of any human. At least that's what Tanaka thought. This is the expression of a demon beast. Suddenly everything came into focus. The veil had been lifted. Tanaka grabbed Marianne's hair. It was like grabbing the hair of a doll. This time there was altogether no resistance. This audio was brought to you by Yakutami, voice of the web. YAKITOME.com